Hello and welcome to a stitch in time on the edge, or certainly about time. So what we have here is the Microtech Stitch. Let's get that open and lay that down in front of us. Beefy looking knife right there. So what this is a production version of a custom Marfione and Borka Blades design. So I believe this knife originally came out in 2017, and the version that I've got here is actually date of birth quite recently. So that's the 1st of 2021. So this year. So a young, big, I was going to say little, a young, big knife, this. So what I'm going to be doing is the usual. I'm going to be doing materials and then dimensions and weight, and then we'll dive a little bit into the design and attributes of, let me say it again, this beefy looking, aggressive looking, but handsome also looking knife. So what we've got is a blade of M390, and as is typical of Microtech, you can actually get this knife in a few other blade steels. But you don't really seem to have a choice unless you shop around. So as blade steels become available, obviously, to Microtech, they will produce this knife with a number of other blade steels. And the other ones that are used are Carpenter CTS 204P or the Carpenter XHP, or you can get it in Elmex, depending on what's available and when the knife was actually made. Right, we've got a handle of hard anodized aluminium, and that's 6061 T6 aluminium. We've got a clip of stainless steel. The hardware, the screws are all stainless steel, and the pivot screw is stainless steel as well. We've got a big aluminium backspacer. And then the pivot, and I want to speak a little bit about that later on, interesting construction around the pivot. But the pivot does not have any washers in it. So it has a bushing around the pivot. But again, I'll speak more about that later on. Dimensions and weight. And I looked at the dimensions and weight on Microtech's site, and then I did a little bit of measuring myself. And, well, my dimensions come out a little bit differently. So I will quote the ones that I have actually checked myself. So we've got a blade length of 92.9 millimeters, and that's 3.66 inches. Blade thickness, we've got 4.9 millimeters, beefy blade, in keeping with the rest of the knife, I guess, and that's 0.19 inches. Handle thickness, we've got 15.8 millimeters, and that's 0.62 inches, and then it's a little bit wider around the pivot, so we've got these bulges around the pivot as well, and so at that point it is 19.3 millimeters or 0.76 inches. Closed length of the knife, we've got 124.7 millimeters, and that's 4.9 inches. And then overall length, I do enjoy doing this. Overall length is 217.6 millimeters, and that's 8.56 inches. And then weight, I'm not going to pull the scale on here for a change, because I have actually checked the weights, their stated weight. So they said 6.3 ounces, and it is exactly what I got, and that's 178 grams. So it certainly is a hefty boy, this, but you would expect that when you look at the construction and size of the knife. Right, let's get into design and attributes. So what we have is a spear point blade, but we've got this very big swedge at the back. So we get this harpoon shape on this spear point blade. The main grind is, the primary grind is a flat grind, very, very neatly done. By the way, this specific version has the stonewash finish on it, and you can get it in that apocalyptic finish as well, which is sort of a matte finish and a little bit of a rougher. But the stonewash on this, really, really gorgeous, beautifully, beautifully finished blade. And while I'm speaking about beautifully finished, the edge on this knife is also so very neatly done. Try and turn that so you can see it. So quite a narrow little edge, but very uniform, incredibly neatly done, and nice and sharp out of the box. And then while we're speaking about that as well, you can see the little sharpening tool just behind that edge. So easy enough to keep that that edge nice and sharp and touched up. big forward finger choil, and we've got jimping on that as well. And then we've got, I spoke about that big harpoon shape, and that gives you a nice resting place when you're sort of bearing down on the knife, doing that sort of hard use type work. Your thumb really beautifully fits in there, and that's also jimped on the spine of the blade. And if you look at that, the spine, a little bit rounded on the edge, but wow, that is a beefy blade. And you can see it tapering off to quite a stabby tip on the blade as well. But a really interesting and very, very handsome, good-looking blade, in my opinion. Big hole. Do I need to even speak about it? Big hole cut into the blade. Does it really have a purpose? We'll speak about that a little bit later as well. But a nice beveled edge on that hole in the blade as well. So that also really, really beautifully finished off. The handle, you can see this drop to the handle, and that of course makes the knife very, very comfortable in hand because it fits beautifully into the palm of your hand. And I might as well look at that now. So let's get a look at the size of this knife. Not a small knife. So holding it a little bit further back completely on the handle, you can see still plenty of place on the back of that handle for beefier paws. And then this handle, this knife, I should say, really begs you to choke up on that blade with that big forward finger choil, and that is really comfortable. So, you can get a grip of it like that, moving a little bit further back onto the handle, sort of like that, and that feels very comfortable. And then you can slide your hand right forward, getting your thumb just behind that harpoon-shaped blade. Really, really very comfortable in hand, this knife. Let's look a little bit more at that handle. Let's just close that before I do myself an injury. So the handle's slightly rounded when we look at it end on, and then the edges of that handle have a little chamfered edge around there as well. So no hot spots in that. Really, really comfortable in hand, this. And then we've got that milling very beautifully done on the knife as well. And you can see it, these little milled pads on there. It's little triangular shapes that really do give you very, very good grip on the handle. So between that and the big jimped backspacer and your jimping on the blade, when you get this knife in hand and the jimping on that forward finger choil, then the knife really is very, very secure in your hand. Let's look a little bit about that, that backspacer as well. So big aluminium backspacer, quite aggressive jimping on the back there. So almost a closed back design on this knife, gives nice protection to the edge of the blade when it's closed as well. And then you can see the handle just cuts back a little bit to expose a nice little lanyard hole there as well, oblong lanyard hole that is sort of cut back and integrated nicely, does not stick out, integrated nicely into that handle. The rest of the handle you can see around the pivot, and we've got these very, very beefy pivot screws. In fact, all the screws are quite beefy on this. You can see those Torx screws, and if I didn't mention, those are all Torx, so easy enough to get into this knife. But they're all bigger than you would find on most knives. But then that pivot screw also nice and beefy, and you can see the little raised area around that also really beautifully finished off around that pivot. And then the button, so the little this is a button lock or plunge lock, I suppose you could some people call it as well, and that's the button that you would use to deploy the knife. I'm not going to speak about the action yet, I'll speak about that just now, but that little lip around the button, just to protect it a little bit, means that the knife doesn't deploy easily by accident, if that makes sense. You've really got to get a lot of pressure onto that, and the button actually moves in quite deeply before it will deploy. So the button actually has to go below the surface of that lip before it'll deploy. So this is not a knife that is easily going to deploy by accident, and it's certainly not a knife that you would want to deploy accidentally in your pocket. You might do some what shall we say, vital organs, some serious damage, some things you might miss if they got damaged. Should we put it like that? Yes. Right, let's have a look at this. So pocket clip, tip up carry. very neatly done. So you can see that it is countersunk into the handle. That's very neatly done. We've also got very beefy screws on that as well, torque screws once again. And then it is, you can see the slight curve to it. It is not reversible, so the curve does follow the shape for the right hand side, so it is tip up right hand carry only. But also a nice touch, you can see behind that clip, so where we've got that that texturing, that milling on the handle, it actually stops behind the pocket clip. So getting this over cloth is not going to be an issue. It's not going to bite and chew up material. So getting this onto material, not a big mission. The space behind that pocket clip, pretty tight, and then you can see it's got that little kink in the middle of it, the same as you would find on a Chris Reeve knife, and that just adds a little bit to the springiness, the flexibility of that pocket clip. But another gripping point as well, once you get that over cloth, you've just got that point that grips onto the cloth, and that as well to make sure that it really is secure in your pocket. Right, what else did I want to speak about the knife before I get into the action? I think I've probably gone through everything that I wanted to. I am going to speak about the action, but also about the construction around the pivot. Maybe before I get into that, is just speak about that the stop pin. So we've got that really beefy stop pin as well, and just as well, if you see the force that this blade opens with, I mean, it really does open with authority. It thumps out when you push that button. Right, so the pivot as well, the pivot, I mentioned is very beefy, and the interesting construction around there. So I mentioned the fact that there is no washer inside there, but if we look at that handle, just around that portion there, and I hope that's coming up, you can see that the handle, the way that it's milled there, is just slightly raised, and that's a flat area of that aluminium that sort of, it's got an interesting shape around there, but this whole area kind of looks like that. It's this flat, slightly raised area, and that is what the blade interfaces with. So you get this really secure, there's no play in the blade because it is interfacing with that little platform, I guess you could call it, on the inside of the handle. So the blade is actually rubbing up against that aluminium there. So that's partly what's making the blade so solid. You don't get the side-to-side movement. But then as well, you've got this thick shaft running through there that is the pivot itself. And around that, it has a sleeve, like a bushing, a stainless steel bushing that runs around that. And the tolerances between that and that shaft are really tight. And then that is what runs through the hole in the blade. And the tolerances there are very tight as well. So there's absolutely no play. It is rock solid. It is very, very strongly built. And because the spring, I mean, the tension on that spring, the size of the spring, and the strength of that spring, you don't really need a washer in there or ball bearings, because the knife does really fly out there. And then if we look at that lock, so a typical lock that you will find in a push button or plunge lock, you can see the sort of thicker area on that little shaft. So you push that, and that's what moves out the way to release the blade. So lock it in its open position and in its closed position, and then a little bit of leeway on this side for that to move into. You can see the little bulge over there. So when you push that, that's what that moves into on that side, to create a little bit of space for that lock to move into when you're pushing it. And obviously the spring will be sitting in there as well, I assume, unless it's on the side. I don't know. No, it must be on that side, surely. And then, good design. That lock, that's the little cutout on the blade, on the tang, that lock interfaces with. And you can see that has a sort of tapered shape to it as well. So over time, that lock, that little thicker area there, as it wears, will just move further and further into that tapered area. So the blade will always have good lockup over time. So really, really nicely designed knife. So yeah, absolutely beautiful. Really do like this knife. feels good in hand. And by the way, this has now joined my collection as well. Got this in hand, and feeling that action and looking at the shape of the knife. It is a gorgeous piece. Just had to add it to the collection. So I kind of think I've now gone through pretty much everything on the knife. Quick glance at the notes, as I always do, and make sure that I haven't left anything out. But yeah, beautiful. The action on the knife, the way that button works, the feel of that button, and it does require force to put it in there. But I'm gonna shut up and just let that knife speak for itself. I'm gonna push the button and watch how it goes out with the authority I spoke about, and you'll probably see the little jerk as it opens as well. Oh, that is absolutely intoxicating. And if you were wondering if you wanted to see that in the reverse grip, I suppose more like that onto the handle, but if you moved closer forward onto it, so that really comfortable in your hand in reverse grip as well. Right, guys. So I suppose in one sense I don't to thank Blades and Triggers, because they didn't give this knife to me or lend this knife to me to do the review, because I do actually own it, but it does come from Blades and Triggers. So please check them out, Blades and Triggers. This and other great knives on their website, BNT Online. And I guess that just leaves me to do some size comparisons. So I brought out, just because it is such a beefy knife, I had to bring out a few other beefy knives. So this obviously an auto opening knife. Did I actually mention that? I probably didn't, but I suppose by this stage is quite obvious. Button lock or plunge lock, auto opening knife. Oh, you know what I didn't speak about is the markings on the blade. So, let's have a look at that as well. So the very, very neat little Borka Blades designer's mark on the what do we call that, the swedge at that harpoon shape. So that very nice. And then obviously the usual Microtech markings on it. And as mentioned before, this specific knife, are we going to see that? I've got too many reflections here. M390, there's your blade steel. So there we go. But that Borka Blades logo, really nice, and nice to have that on the blade as well. Right, now let's get into those size comparisons. So I mentioned this is a beefy knife, so I had to bring a few beefy knives open as well. And this I've mentioned before, one of the few, assisted opening knives I actually have. And this is the Zero Tolerance, the Ken Onion design, the 0300. Needed to bring that on there, get two beefy guys on screen. And there we go. Well, isn't that a nice thumbnail or a nice poster? Well, very, very similarly sized knives, and probably similar weights as well. Yeah, the Zero Tolerance a little heavier because that's titanium and not aluminium. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. Have a quick look at the, sorry for the earthquake, just bash my camera there, let that steady for a bit. There we go, there's the show sides of those two knives. Well, that really does look very good. Right, let's get that out of the way. And then, of course, I had to bring the other big boy. And this is the, not quite able to get the Spidey flick going on this, but this is the Medford Praetorian T. Let's have a look at those two together. Again, two big boys. Very, very good looking knife. Oh, there's another great shot. Let's flip that over and get the show sides of those two as well. That's certainly worthwhile looking at. Yeah, that is beautiful. I've said it in some other reviews, but when you get a shot like this, this is why we collect knives, for things like that. Beautiful. I wonder what the weights of those two are. Yeah, once again, Medford is a big, beefy, and very heavy knife. Right, and then I will use before I use the usuals, let's bring this one. I haven't brought him on for a little while as well, but I thought bring him on too. So this is the Bestech Shodan, and this is the Todd Knife and Tool designed knife by Bestech. See those two together as well. Why I wanted to show this is, while this knife is very big, that big finger choil, the same that you get on the Shodan, but the extra sharpening choil does shorten a little bit your edge. So the actual edge of the knife, although the knife and the blade is quite big, the edge is not exactly very, very long, but I think long enough for this to be a very effective user for heavy use. Right, let's get the Shodan out of the way. Okay, let's leave that way, and then I will use the usual knives for my size comparisons, and as I always do say, simply because these knives have been out for a long time, so give you a little bit of size perspective, perhaps something that you can relate to. And this is the Spyderco Manix 2. Right, give you a sense of that. And then the other one is the, I'm going to stretch around here, the Medford Slim Midi. Let's have a look at that. And every time I flick that out, some dust comes out with it. But that's all to say, it just shows that that's in regular carry rotation. That's why it's always got fluff and dust in it. Right, there's that. The Medford Slim Midi. And I did say that this knife would crop up more and more. And again, I think it's a knife that is well known and so many people do own, and that is the Spyderco PM2 in this instance. PM2? No, the PM3, the smaller one, the PM3. Right, we'll get there eventually. There you go. Another little bit of a size comparison, give you a sense of that. And then the last one is the Benchmade Mini Barrage, considerably smaller knife, but once again, you might know that knife, so it just does give you a little bit of a sense of it. Right, and that is that. I think I've covered off everything I wanted to on this. Well, it is a gorgeous knife. I've actually had this knife now probably for going on about a month, and it's one of those purchases that I'm, well, you know, every day I take it out, and it is in my hands when I'm at home. It is in my hands a lot. It is really a fidget toy, and it's one of those knives that the more you have it in your hand, for me, the more I actually like this knife. It's one of those where I have absolutely no buyer's remorse. I don't have buyer's remorse that often when I buy a knife, but on this one, I really do like the knife, and the more I've got it in my hand, the more I've owned it, the more I do like this knife. So gorgeous piece. Yeah, if you can get one in your hand, try it out. Solid, beautifully made, by the way, really nice finish, nicely finished off, great design, comfortable in hand. And a looker. Face it. And of course, that's very subjective, but I really do like the look of that knife. Right, guys, I've waffled on and on and on, and I guess, again, it's one of those knives where you can tell I really do like the knife. Well, obviously I do. It is part of my collection, and it is certainly one that is going to have a permanent home in the collection. Guys, all that's really left to do is for me, once again, to thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it when you swing by, and as I always do say, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and then also that bell icon so that you can be informed every time I release a new video, because as I always do say, I would really love you to join me more often. And other than that, you go well, and God bless.